of bad economic policy. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we do have to look at sound economic principles. And to me, it isn't too complicated because we had a pretty good example of what we should do. This country has been the freest country really in the history of the world. It's been the most prosperous country in the world. It believed in sound money, had a gold standard. It believed in property rights, you own your property. It believed in contracts, you fulfill your promises, you have to follow contracts. You can't hurt other people, you can't steal, you can't defraud people. So there's a lot of regulations in a free market economy. So we became the most prosperous country in the world. And all of a sudden, though, something happened because it wasn't the protection of the principles of liberty in our Constitution that became most important for the politician. It was the wealth. And they thought, well, we got to make sure everybody gets their fair share. We got to shift around. Somebody needs this. So the government got in responding to the lobbyists. So they concentrated on the materialism that is produced in a free society, and that undermined the principles of liberty. But still, for 10, 20, 30 years, we were so wealthy that we had this wealth, and then we consumed the wealth. We chased our good jobs overseas. We chased our capital overseas. We've destroyed the value of our currency, and then we had to start borrowing. And we used to be a creditor nation. During the 19th century, we were the creditor nation, and into the 20th century, we loaned money to other people. Now, we're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world, $3 trillion. And who's one of the biggest, might be the biggest creditor nation now? China. We have to go to them. Every time somebody asks for something, they're saying, yes, I know it's a problem, I know it's difficult, it's a tight budget, but you go over and hat in hand and ask China to loan us a little bit more money. Go and hawk a little bit more to foreign entities. But that can last for so long. We can spend, we can produce, you destroy that, and you can borrow, you can do that for so long, and then you can start printing money. And that's what we've been doing. And it's amazing that it's lasted this long, because it's based on trust. It's based on the trust that we are, the most powerful nation and the richest nation in the world. But we're getting poorer by the day, and we're getting more indebted by the day. And therefore, our economy keeps going down. And so far, we have not yet had any strong suggestion of going in a different direction, like really changing the tax code. We have a tax code that chases capital away. Corporations are making a lot of money, but why open a new business in this country? It takes years to get a business open up too often, and the money is chased overseas, and they start businesses elsewhere. I've had business people tell me it takes them 3 weeks to start a business in China, and it takes 3 years to maybe get started in this country. You fill out all the forms, and all the requests and all the permits. So we have chased capital away. But when the country gets to issue the reserve, which is the dollar, because the dollar is like gold. All the other central banks take the dollar, and they put it in their bank, and they use that as a reserve, and they build their economy on that. In the old days, it used to be gold. It had to be a reserve. And then that was phased out. In our country, we had gold and silver as reserves. And then later on, we started just using treasury bills. So the more money the more money Congress spent, and the more treasury bills he issued, the more the Fed bought those with money created in thin air, and they put them in as reserves. So, well, everybody said, what the heck? If I have a treasury bill, that's a safe investment. We're okay. So everybody thought, well, this was just grand. But now that we actually use, the Federal Reserve holds derivatives that they had to buy to bail out the banks. They're held in the Federal Reserve to back up our currency. And it doesn't make any sense, and it's not going to last. So I think what we're witnessing today is the coming to the end of the dollar reserve standard. It's never happened before. There's never been a bubble like this before, and it's not going to be easy. But we have to get some people who understand this, and more people are. This is where I'm very encouraged. Even on the business news these days, they're starting to talk about sound money in the business cycle and tax policy that makes sense. But then there's this, the other part is saying, get me more money, get me more stuff, and don't worry about where you just get it for me, and worry about paying for it some other day. There's an emergency, get me the money right now. And there's a conflict there, but it will come to an end. Unfortunately, it's going to come to an end with an economic crisis where they just reject the dollar. So we have to do whatever we can as individuals, as we as politicians, and anybody who's involved, to correct it and work our way out of this. And each little program that I talk about, I always like to see a transition to say, you know, if we do this, save our money here, put some against a deficit, take care of some other people over here. But the truth is, the likelihood of us working our way out of it isn't very good. And that means that we are going to face a major decision here in the next several years of deciding what we want in our country, whether we really believe in the Constitution or not. We got into this mess because we had too many people in Washington that rationalized and said, you know, the Constitution is outdated, we don't need to follow it. We got into trouble because we had too many like that. And you know, I'm convinced that we could get out of this problem by only sending people to Washington that will take their oath of office seriously.
Yeah.
The question that we, as a people, have to ask ourselves is, what should the role of government be? And the role of government is precisely defined in the Constitution. And the role of government should be there to protect our liberties, give us a strong national defense, provide for a general environment, is what I like to think of, to let us operate, to let us function, to let us have our freedoms and our liberties and allow us to keep the fruits of our labor. We don't need to assume that prosperity comes when we cough up and give the federal government all our money and let them spend it. That's where the problem is. We have to trust freedom. Freedom doesn't bring about perfect equality, but neither does socialism. And neither does the interventionism that we have today. Just think of the inequality of what happened with this crisis. During the crisis building and with the housing bubble, which was talked about by the Austrian economists, you know, quite frequently. I wrote about it and spoke about it, and it was there. We knew it was coming, so it burst. So what happens? People were making a lot of money, and then they turned into big-time speculators with derivatives and all the instruments, and they got themselves into trouble. The banks were in trouble, and these mortgage companies were in trouble, and we had these guarantees with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And so the bubble burst. So what happens? They rush to Congress. There's a calamity on our footstep. We have to do something. It's almost like what they tell you when they want you to go to war. Oh, there's a calamity. There's going to be a nuclear bomb drop on us tomorrow unless we go to war and start the war and try to stop these people. So they come in and they say, the calamity is coming. There's a depression coming unless we bail them out. So guess who gets bailed out? The banks get bailed out. And the big businesses get bailed out. And what happens to all the bad debt? Did it get written off the books? And did we liquidate it so we can get back to growth again? No, we propped up all the mistakes because the Fed went and printed all this money and bought off all these assets they called illiquid. Illiquid means they're not worth anything. So you own them now. So what happened? What happened to the Depression? The people who deserved the Depression didn't get it. They're still making a lot of money. They got bailed out, and we bought all their bad stuff. But how about the people who thought the government would always take care of themselves with their housing programs and all the giveaway programs? They lost their jobs. Then they lost their houses. So the very people that were supposed to benefit by all this government program and all this promises and easy money are the ones who have suffered the most. So therefore, we have to revamp it. We have to restore our confidence, belief, and understanding about what we were given, how the marketplace works. There's a better understanding today of how the market works and how the monetary system works than it was even at the time of our founding. So I never accept this idea that we have to go back to that old-fashioned gold standard. No, it can be modern. It can be better than anything ever before. But all I want to do is reject the old-fashioned ideas of tyranny, regulations, government control, abuse of the people, bad money, and all the things that bring us to our knees like this. There's our history is so clear where paper money always fails, gold money always lasts. It's been around for 6,000 years. And yet, we've only had a short experiment with this free society. We've had the freest society, but most of history and most of the world today are controlled by tyrants. And we're moving in that direction. We don't call them tyrants, but we have a lot of control coming out of Washington. We lose a lot of our freedoms, our personal liberties, our control of our land, the control of our money, the control of our personal lives, the control of how we travel at the airports. I mean, it's on and on how much liberties that we have lost. We've even gotten to the point now where the federal government is so wise that they're going to make all your decisions on everything you eat, drink, and smoke. And therefore, if you happen to think that raw milk is good for you, you better check with the federal government because they don't want you to do that. So I say, let's have a policy of reinstating liberty. If we had a free society, a president doesn't have to know what you want to do. I don't have to know what is best for you. I might make a mistake and I don't know what you want. That's what freedom is all about. You're responsible. I don't know what religion you want to follow. I'm not going to tell you. So why isn't that applied to everything? Your intellectual pursuits should be your decision. Why shouldn't your economic pursuits be your own business? Governments can't take care of it. Once the government embarks on taking care of us and protecting us from ourselves, there's no liberty left. That's when they tell you And unfortunately, we have moved sharply in that direction, and yet the people are now waking up. But the contest is there, like I said, the contest is between those who have come to believe, and they sincerely believe it, and I can understand why they believe it. They make a term, an entitlement synonymous with rights. It's not a right to be entitled to somebody else's property. It's your property. But as long as they believe they're entitled to it, we're going to have a job on our hands because the pie is shrinking. It's shrinking rapidly. And, you know, the debt problem, even though I don't like tax, but I want to talk a minute about where I would cut first. It involves foreign expenditures. And when we talk about economic policies, we're supposed to be talking about spending and tax policy and regulations, and that is very important, but you cannot separate foreign expenditures from economic reality. The Soviet system collapsed because of expansion of their empire that they couldn't manage, and they finally had to declare bankruptcy, and the Soviet system fell apart. And that wasn't new. That has happened throughout history. Large countries, sometimes they last a long time, sometimes hundreds of years, but eventually they fail because they produce less and they expand themselves and they can't afford it. Things move much quicker these days, and if we don't change our ways, we will have to see significant changes. But we spend well over $1 trillion, some people estimate $1.5 trillion to manage our foreign policy overseas. And to me, this should be the easiest place to cut. You know, why can't we cut there? Because there's so many programs at home that we should have never started, but I don't particularly want to say, well, what we need to do is start cutting. So I think my first proposal is we cut aid for child health care, or cut the aid for the elderly, or something like that. That doesn't make any sense at all. But even though I know it's a threat, if we don't do the right thing, everybody's going to get hurt because the money won't buy anything. So I think we can save a lot of money. I'd bring the troops home, all the troops home. The immediate effect effect for this would be you wouldn't even have to discharge them from service. People worry about that. Would you discharge them? No, just come home and let them spend the money at home instead of in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. But economically, you shouldn't even worry too much about that, because we sent millions home after World War II, and they came home and they were discharged, and we cut spending in half, and we cut